Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at pretty ethically murky waters. We're examining a case that I think it's safe to say gripped the nation and sparked heated debate: the death of Jordan Neely on a New York City subway.
Yeah, this is not a simple open and shut case, not at all. There are so many layers of context to consider. We've got Jordan's mental health struggles, we've got the city's approach to homelessness, we've got the bystander effect, and of course the legal complexities of self-defense claims. It's a lot. We're going to unpack all of it, but just be warned, this story will stay with you.
For sure. And to help us unpack all of this, we've got a fascinating stack of sources like news articles, court transcripts, eyewitness accounts, and even a really in-depth look into Jordan's life story. All to help us answer a pretty tough question. Was Daniel Penny the ex-Marine who held Jordan in that fatal chokehold? Was he a well-intentioned protector? Or was he a reckless vigilante?
It's a question that really gets at some uncomfortable truths about our own biases, right? It makes us think about our assumptions about mental illness, homelessness, and personal responsibility. Maybe the best place to start is try to understand who Jordan Neely was.
Okay, let's do that. The sources paint a pretty vivid picture of his life, and it's full of these contradictions. On the one hand, you have this incredibly talented Michael Jackson impersonator. Some reports say he was even making, a decent living from his performances in Times Square and on the subway.
It's interesting, right? That talent, that spark was always there. But then it seems like his life just took this tragic turn after losing his mother. He was only 14.
Yeah.
Imagine the trauma of that. Losing a parent at that age, and then being thrust into the foster care system. I mean, it's not surprising that he struggled to cope.
Not at all. And those struggles, they eventually manifested as mental illness. The sources mentioned frequent hospitalizations. He seemed to be resistant to accepting help. There were even encounters where he seemed disoriented, confused. It really highlights just how complex mental health challenges can be.
It really does, and it also raises questions about if the resources that were available to him were sufficient. Could more have been done to support him? Was he truly resistant to help? Or were the systems that were supposed to be providing help, were they just inadequate or inaccessible?
Right. And we also can't ignore the fact that he had a history of run-ins with the law, 42 prior arrests. Some involved accusations of assault, while others were for more minor offenses like fare evasion or public intoxication.
It's important to note that those arrests, they span over several years, and they range widely in severity. If you sort of step back and look at the bigger picture, those repeated encounters with the legal system, they could point to a pattern of criminalizing poverty and mental illness, right? Instead of addressing the root causes. It's this systemic issue that goes way beyond Jordan Neely's individual case.
For sure. And he was even arrested back in 2016 for exposing himself to a woman on the subway. The sources say he was, deeply ashamed and distraught afterwards, even expressing fears that schizophrenia was taking hold.
That incident, it could be interpreted as a cry for help, a manifestation of his deteriorating mental state. It makes you wonder, did the systems that were supposed to be in place to support him, did they fail to intervene effectively? Could earlier and more consistent intervention have changed things? Could it have altered the course of his life?
And then there's it's almost this haunting encounter mentioned in the sources where just days before his death, he had a conversation with someone named Moses Harper. Apparently, he was lucid, sorrowful, and seemed to be aware of his condition.
It's poignant. It really paints this picture of a man caught in a spiral, aware of his struggles, but completely unable to break free. It just adds another layer of tragedy to this story.
It does. It makes his death on that F train
Yeah.
all the more heartbreaking. Speaking of which, let's maybe start to delve into the incident itself.
Yes, let's take a closer look at what happened that day, keeping in mind that there are differing accounts, differing perspectives that we need to consider.
Right. According to witnesses, Jordan started acting erratically on the train. Some say he was yelling about being hungry, thirsty, and tired. Others claim he was making threats.
Yeah.
There was this freelance journalist. He witnessed the incident and recorded the video, the now infamous video.
Mhm.
He said that Jordan yelled that he didn't mind going to jail or even getting life in prison. But this journalist also maintained that Jordan didn't physically attack anyone.
It's crucial to acknowledge the role of perception in these situations. The same behavior can be interpreted so differently depending on, individual biases and the prevailing social climate.
That's a good point. And to make things even more complicated, one of the key witnesses actually later admitted to lying to the police. Initially, he claimed that Jordan attacked him. But during the trial, he confessed that he fabricated the attack out of fear of facing criminal charges. charges related to Jordan's death.
That's huge,
You-
because it really undermines the narrative that Jordan was inherently dangerous, that he posed this immediate threat to everyone around him. It raises questions about how fear and self-preservation, how they can influence eyewitness accounts, especially in these high-stakes situations.
So we've got a complex picture of Jordan's behavior. Some perceive him as a threat, others don't, and at least one witness admitted to exaggerating his account. It's into this chaotic and ambiguous situation that Daniel Penny steps in.
Yes, and this is where the legal complexities of self-defense come into play.
And we're back, continuing to unpack the death of Jordan Neely on that New York City subway. And of course, the intense debate surrounding Daniel Penny, the ex-Marine who held him in that fatal chokehold. Before we took a break, we were just about to explore the legal complexities of self-defense and how they apply to this case.
Yeah, it's a crucial part of this whole story. Penny's defense really hinged on this argument that he was acting to protect himself and others from what he perceived as a threat.
Right, the sources detail how his lawyers emphasized his military training and his instinct to intervene in a dangerous situation. They argued he didn't intend to kill Jordan, he just wanted to restrain him until the police arrived.
And it brings up this key legal concept, the duty to retreat. In many jurisdictions, if a person is claiming self-defense, they have to show that they tried to avoid the whole confrontation or that they tried to retreat if possible before resorting to force. But this duty to retreat, it can get complicated in a confined space, like a subway car, where escape routes are limited.
So even if Penny genuinely believed Jordan posed a threat, the question becomes, did he have a reasonable opportunity to retreat before using the chokehold? And the video footage, which became central to the trial, it doesn't really give us a clear answer.
And that ambiguity, that probably played a part in the jury's decision. Remember, they acquitted Penny of the manslaughter charge, the more serious one, which requires proving a conscious disregard for the risk of death.
But they did find him guilty of criminally negligent homicide, acknowledging that his actions, while maybe not intentionally malicious, were reckless and ultimately led to Jordan's death.
The fact that they convicted him on that lesser charge, it suggests that maybe they believed Penny's perception of the threat was reasonable. But the force he used and how long he held that chokehold, that was excessive.
It's a nuanced verdict, really reflects the complexity of the case. Even if Penny wasn't driven by malice, his actions had these devastating consequences.
Yeah, and the sentencing highlights those nuances even more. Even though he was facing a potential 15-year prison sentence for that negligent homicide charge, he ended up getting 5 years of probation, no jail time.
And that sparked a whole other wave of controversy, with some praising the judge's leniency and others condemning it as a miscarriage of justice. It really speaks to how deeply divided people are on this case.
Absolutely. This case became a flashpoint. It sparked these discussions about race, mental health, homelessness, vigilantism. The reaction, totally polarized. It really mirrored these existing fault lines in our society.
For sure. Conservative commentators, they were hailing Penny as a hero, like a good Samaritan, someone who stepped up to protect innocent bystanders. Some even framed him as a victim of a system that's too lenient on criminals, a system that fails to protect law-abiding citizens.
Yeah, and then you have those on the left who saw the verdict as another example of a justice system that favors white defendants over black victims. They pointed to the fact that Penny, a white man, wasn't even charged initially after killing Jordan, a black man. To them, that's evidence of systemic bias.
And we can't forget the political aspect of this. Politicians from both sides weighed in, adding fuel to the fire. Mayor Eric Adams, he urged caution, said not to rush to judgment, while Governor Kathy Hochul, she described Jordan's death as deeply disturbing.
Right, and some, like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she went even further, calling it a murder, and really highlighting the city's failure to address homelessness and mental health. And then, on the other side, you had Republican lawmakers rallying in support of Penny. They even passed a resolution in the House of Representatives honoring his actions.
It just goes to show how easily a tragedy like this can be used, co-opted to serve political agendas. But beyond all the political posturing, this case brings up these profound questions about our responsibilities as a society.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. It forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about how we treat the most vulnerable. Jordan's story, it's a tragic example of a system that fails those who are struggling with mental illness and homelessness.
It does. And the sources are just full of accounts of his struggles to get consistent help.
Yeah.
Even though he was on the radar of different outreach programs and social workers, it seems like he just fell through the cracks, lost in this bureaucratic maze.
And that raises such an important question. Could his death have been prevented? What if the system intervened more effectively? Could Jordan have gotten the support he needed, the support to manage his mental health and avoid this tragic end?
It also sheds light on this issue, the criminalization of poverty and mental illness. Instead of addressing the root causes, we often turn to these punitive measures, measures that further isolate and marginalize those who are already struggling.
Exactly. And, this case also sparked this whole debate about vigilantism. Critics argue that Penny didn't need to get involved, that he injected himself into a situation that could have been de-escalated without violence. They see his actions as setting a dangerous precedent, blurring the lines between self-defense and reckless intervention.
Right. And his supporters. Well, they say he was brave, that he stepped up to protect the people around him. They say he was filling a void left by inadequate law enforcement.
And that leads us to another point. Individual responsibility versus collective responsibility. Do we have a duty to intervene, even if it means putting ourselves at risk? Or should we rely on the authorities to handle things?
These are such complex questions, and there are no easy answers,
Yeah.
but they are questions we have to grapple with. As a society, the fact that this case generated such intense debate, such different opinions, shows how important it is. This isn't just some abstract legal case. This is about real people, about the human cost of societal indifference.
You're right. And we need to consider the perspective of someone who is actually there, someone who has firsthand experience with the challenges faced by those living on the streets.
You're talking about Johnny Grima, the activist. He was formerly homeless himself, and he was on that same F train when Jordan Neely died. His account adds this whole other layer to this already complex story.
He said something that really stuck with me. He said, it's shameful, there's no getting around it. It's like this powerful indictment of the system's failures.
Yeah. His perspective, coming from someone who's been in Jordan's shoes, is a call to action, like a plea for empathy and understanding.
Exactly. This isn't about placing blame or debating legal technicalities. It's about recognizing that our lives are all connected. It's about understanding the ripple effects of her choices and recognizing our shared responsibility to build a society that's more just, more compassionate.
Back again. And man, we've really spent this whole episode just exploring this tragedy, the death of Jordan Neely, a man battling mental illness and homelessness, on a New York City subway no less. His death and then the trial of Daniel Penny, that ex-Marine who held him in that fatal chokehold, it just ignited this whole firestorm, a debate about race, about justice, and our responsibility to the most vulnerable people in our society.
Yeah, it's a story that really forces us to confront some hard truths about ourselves, our biases, our assumptions about mental illness and homelessness, and about the systems in place, the ones that are supposed to be helping those in need.
We've really tried to examine it all, the legal complexities, the different eyewitness accounts, the reactions, the publics, the politicians, such divided responses. And yet, even as we get to the end of this deep dive, I feel like there's still so much to think about.
It's fascinating how this one single incident, it's like this prism, it refracts all these huge societal issues. And it forces us to think beyond simple labels. Hero, villain. It pushes us to look at the gray areas, those uncomfortable nuances that make us human.
Yeah. And we can't forget what Johnny Grima said. He was right there on that train. He said, it's shameful. There's no getting around it. Man, that's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
It really shows the human cost of when systems fail.
It is. And his perspective, right, coming from someone who's been in Jordan's shoes, it's a call to action, to have empathy, to understand.
Absolutely. This isn't just about pointing fingers or getting lost in legal details. It's about recognizing that our lives are connected. It's about understanding that our choices have consequences.
Yeah.
And realizing that we have a shared responsibility to build a society that's more just, more compassionate.
Exactly. So the question is, where do we go from here? What can we actually do as individuals to actually make a difference?
What can we do?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. We need to learn about these issues. Mental illness, homelessness, the complexities. We need to challenge our own biases, our own assumptions, and we have to advocate for change, for policies and programs that target the root causes, not just the symptoms.
The sources we looked at, they really highlighted the need for more funding, for mental health services, affordable housing, programs that help people get back on their feet, that give them support, resources.
We need to look inward, too, at our own responses to people in need. Do we react with fear, with judgment? Or can we approach them with compassion, with a willingness to help? Sometimes even just a simple act of kindness, just listening to someone, it can make a huge difference.
And thinking bigger picture, we have to hold our leaders accountable to create a society that's fairer, one that prioritizes everyone's well-being, not just the privileged few.
This case, it really showed us the cracks in our system, cracks that have been there for a long time. It's time to start fixing those, to build a community that's more inclusive,
Mm.
more supportive, a place where everyone has the chance to thrive.
It feels daunting, but it's necessary. Jordan Neely's story, as tragic as it is, maybe it can be what sparks change. It reminds us that we're all connected and that we have the power to make things better.
If we learn from this, if we can turn our anger, our sadness into action, maybe then Jordan's death won't be in vain.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It was tough, but so important. And keep thinking about these issues. Talk about them, and let's work together to create a future where tragedies like this don't happen anymore. Until next time.